Mike Tyson was once a force of nature, a name that could silence entire arenas before he even stepped into the light. He arrived like a storm the world was unprepared for, a young man whose fists carried the weight of every wound earned in the streets of Brooklyn. At 20, he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, knocking out men twice his size with a ferocity so absolute that even veteran fighters whispered about him with reverence. For a time, he seemed unstoppable, a living myth who walked through fear as if it were air. But legends rarely rise without shadows, and Tyson's shadows grew long. Behind the knockouts and the glory lived a boy shaped by hunger, violence, abandonment, and grief so deep it carved permanent scars into the man he became. Every victory carried an echo of the past he could not outrun. Every headline masked a truth the world refused to see. Now at 59, the storm that once roared inside him has quieted into something far more complex. His body carries the wear of years spent pushing beyond human limits. His heart holds stories of love, regret, loss, and redemption. And the man who once terrified the world now wakes each morning confronting battles no opponent ever placed before him. Fading strength, lingering trauma, fragile health, and memories that refuse to rest. If Mike Tyson has ever moved you, inspired you, or left you in awe, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue honoring stories of resilience like his. Mike Tyson's earliest memories were not of triumph, but of instability. Born on June 30, 1966 in Fort Greene Hospital, he entered a world already splintered. His biological father, Purcell Tyson, disappeared before he ever formed a memory. For a brief moment, another man, Jimmy Kirkpatrick, stepped into the role of father, a presence fragile enough to give hope, yet temporary enough to deepen the wound when he walked away. By the time Mike turned 2, he had been abandoned twice. Those losses carved a truth into him long before he had words for it. He was a child who learned early that people leave. Left with 3 children and little support, his mother, Lorna Tyson, fought a daily battle to keep the family afloat. Exhaustion hung on her shoulders like a permanent weight. They drifted between failing apartments until they finally landed in Brownsville, one of New York's most dangerous neighborhoods, a place where survival demanded alertness, toughness, and luck. Their apartment was drafty, the food inconsistent, and the atmosphere heavy with the quiet shame of poverty. Mike's oversized glasses and soft lisp only worsened his isolation. Bullies targeted him relentlessly. He moved through classrooms and sidewalks like someone the world refused to notice. Years later, he would recall that period with a simple sentence that explained everything. People looked right through me. With no father figure and a mother struggling under the weight of her own battles, Mike learned quickly that protection was not something he could rely on. Shame settled deep inside him. Loneliness became his default companion. And for a boy that young, with nowhere to anchor his fear, anger began filling the empty spaces compassion should have touched. Yet in the middle of all that chaos, he found something gentle. High above the broken sidewalks on the rooftop of their building lived his pigeons, the first beings he ever felt connected to. He built their coops from scraps of wood, fed them crumbs he saved from school lunches, whispered into their feathers secrets he could never trust another human with. They made him feel seen in a world that treated him as invisible. He often said later, "They were the first things I ever loved." That fragile sanctuary shattered one afternoon when a neighborhood boy seized Mike's favorite pigeon and killed it in front of him. For the outside world, it was nothing more than a cruel child's prank. But for Mike, it was devastation. Everything he had poured into that small creature, every softness he had been afraid to show, vanished in that moment. And something inside him finally broke. A fire awakened in him, born not only from rage, but from humiliation and the quiet terror of feeling powerless yet again. That day marked the beginning of the shift. He fought back. He made a vow he would spend the rest of his life trying to uphold. He would never allow anyone to make him feel small again. That vow carried him into the streets, where belonging seemed easier to earn than acceptance. He gravitated toward older boys who ran with a local crew known as the Jolly Stompers. They offered him a version of family based on fear and loyalty rather than love. But for a neglected boy, even that imitation of connection felt meaningful. He ran errands, he followed their codes, he slipped deeper into a world shaped by survival rather than hope. Detentions piled up. Police reports became routine. By the time he was 13, he had been detained nearly 40 times. Each arrest blurred into the next, until his life began resembling a cycle he couldn't escape. And when the streets became too cruel, he hid in abandoned buildings, punching the air inside hollow rooms where his anger ricocheted off cracked walls. It was a childhood defined by wounds rather than guidance, fear rather than safety, and silence rather than comfort. But even in its darkest corners, fate was quietly steering him toward the one man who would change his life forever. It is astonishing how a single moment, a single glance from the right person, can redirect a life the world had already dismissed. For Mike Tyson, that moment arrived inside the bleak walls of the Tryon School for Boys. He was 14, angry, wounded, drifting deeper into a future shaped by violence rather than possibility. Most adults saw a troubled kid destined to fail. But one afternoon, when Bobby Stewart, a counselor and former boxer, watched Mike hit the heavy bag, he froze. There was something raw inside the boy. Power, yes, but also longing. A desperation to matter. A silence so heavy it could break your heart if you listened closely enough. Stewart decided to test the boy. The first training sessions were merciless. Mike's punches were wild, fueled by fury rather than technique. But the potential was unmistakable. After months of discipline, sweat, and emotional taming, Stewart made a decision that would change everything. He took Mike to a small gym in Catskill, a place worn by time yet filled with a presence so profound it seemed to hum inside the walls. There, in that dim light, stood Cus D'Amato. Cus was an aging trainer with a gravel-soft voice and eyes sharp enough to cut through the armor Mike had spent years building to protect himself. The boy expected judgment, disappointment, dismissal. Instead, when Cus studied him, he saw not the crimes on his record or the rage that clouded his expression. He saw greatness. He saw destiny. And then he spoke a sentence that dropped into Mike's life like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would never stop moving. "I believe you can be the youngest heavyweight champion in the world." Those words were more than encouragement. They were salvation. No one had ever expected anything from Mike. No one had ever handed him hope. And suddenly, he stood in front of a man who believed in him so fiercely, it felt like a lifeline thrown across the darkness. Cus didn't just open his gym to Mike. He opened his home. He opened his heart. The boy who had slept in broken apartments now slept under a roof where someone left a hall light on just to let him know he wasn't alone. What Mike craved more than power, more than fame, was belonging. Cus gave him that, but belonging came with expectations. Training under Cus was not physical work. It was transformation. 4 in the morning runs through freezing Catskill streets carved discipline into Mike's bones. 2,000 squats, endless sit-ups, neck exercises that left him trembling, sparring sessions with grown men who hit with the intention of shaping him into steel. Cuss knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just building a fighter. He was rewiring a broken boy. Cuss taught him the peekaboo style, a dance of controlled chaos. Slip by inches, counter with intention, move with purpose. Every motion was a declaration of character. In time, Mike became something extraordinary. Not just strong, but strategic. Not just fierce, but focused. He began to understand fear, not as shame, but as fuel. Cuss often told him, "The hero and the coward feel the same thing. It is what they do that makes them different." Those words would become the backbone of Tyson's life. But even as Mike grew under Cuss's guidance, life prepared its first devastating blow. In 1982, at just 16, Mike lost his mother. Her passing reopened the oldest wound inside him, a wound shaped by abandonment and longing. He cried not only because she was gone, but because she never lived to see him become something more than the broken boy the world had labeled him to be. In that hollow grief, Cuss stepped forward, not as a coach, but as a father. He adopted Mike, giving him a stability he had never known. Under that roof, Mike found not just discipline, but direction, purpose, identity. And for the first time in his life, he believed he might be worthy of the dreams someone else envisioned for him. The boy from Brownsville was evolving into someone the world would soon fear and admire in equal measure. Iron Mike was being forged, and every punch he threw carried not only power, but the weight of every wound, every loss, and every hope that had shaped him. By the time Mike Tyson stepped into the ring for his professional debut in 1985, the prophecy Cuss had whispered into his life was already taking shape. At just 18, he fought with a terrifying mixture of precision and fury, ending his first opponent in under 2 minutes. That year he fought 15 times, an impossible schedule in modern boxing, and knocked out every single man who stood in front of him. He wasn't simply winning, he was devouring the heavyweight division with a hunger the world had never seen. But behind the roar of the crowds, something sacred was missing. Cus D'Amato had passed away months before Tyson entered the professional stage. Though Mike continued to rise, he often said it felt like climbing a mountain without the man who had taught him to walk. Every victory carried a shadow. Every knockout carried a silence. Still, the ascent continued. In 1986, at only 20 years old, Tyson overwhelmed Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Berbick staggered across the ring as if gravity itself had betrayed him, collapsing under the force of Tyson's fists. The arena erupted, the world stood breathless, and yet Mike's first thought was of Cuss. He wished the man who saved him could have stood ringside, watching destiny unfold exactly as he predicted. The following year, Tyson unified the heavyweight division, collecting the WBA, WCB, and IBF titles through a storm of power and near-flawless technique. Opponents fell in seconds. Some never made it out of the first round. The sport had never seen a champion like him, a boxer who moved with the speed of a middleweight and hit with the devastation of a man who carried every wound from his childhood in his fists. And then came the night that defined his legend. June 27, 1988. Mike Tyson versus Michael Spinks. A fight built up as the clash of two greats, a battle that generated more than $20 million in pay-per-view revenue and crowned Tyson with a $22 million purse. Stars filled the arena. Millions watched from home. The tension was almost physical. Then the bell rang. 91 seconds later, it was over. Spinks lay on the canvas, staring up at the lights as history shifted forever. Tyson walked the ring with the calm of a man completing a prophecy rather than celebrating a victory. It was a coronation disguised as a fight. The world bowed to the young king, but fame is a fragile crown. And the brighter the spotlight burned, the deeper the shadows behind him grew. After the glory came the unraveling. The pillars that once held Tyson steady began collapsing one by one. Jimmy Jacobs, his gentle manager, and one of the few men who truly guided him after Cuss's death, lost his battle with leukemia. Kevin Rooney, the trainer who carried Cuss's teachings into Tyson's young career, was pushed out of the team. In their place came voices filled with temptation rather than truth. People who praised him too quickly, protected him too little, and indulged every impulse that fame awakened in him. Tyson later admitted, "I was a kid with too much power, and no one to tell me no." His discipline slipped. Nights stretched into chaos. Headlines filled with controversy. His young marriage fell apart under pressure neither he nor his wife had the tools to navigate. And in early 1990, when Tyson stepped into the ring with Buster Douglas in Tokyo, the world expected another brutal, inevitable knockout. Instead, it witnessed the greatest upset in boxing history. Douglas rose from a knockdown with a fire Tyson could not match that night. And when the final combination landed, Tyson fell to the canvas, dazed and searching for his mouthpiece in disbelief. It felt like the floor of his life had splintered beneath him. A defeat born not from lack of talent, but from the slow erosion occurring inside him for years. Worse storms were waiting. In 1992, Tyson faced a conviction that placed him behind bars for 3 years. The moment the cell door closed, he said it sounded like his entire life had locked away with it. Prison stripped him of noise, of pride, of the world that once bowed at his feet. It forced him to look inward for the first time. "I was lost," he said later. "I didn't know who I was without the chaos." His release in 1995 brought cheers, but the path forward was no longer straight. His comeback fights felt powerful, yet hollow. And in 1997, during the Holyfield rematch, frustration exploded into the infamous bite, a moment he would regret for the rest of his life. The world saw madness. Tyson saw a man drowning in a lifetime of unprocessed pain. His decline continued into the early 2000s, ending with bankruptcy despite earning hundreds of millions. And yet, in the darkness, a small ember survived. The boy Cuss once believed in was still there, buried beneath grief, mistakes, and exhaustion, but not defeated. For a man who had spent his entire life fighting to survive, Mike Tyson's deepest wounds did not come from a punch or a fall from glory. They came from love, from the fragile hope that he could build the family he once dreamed of as a lonely child in Brownsville. And they came from heartbreaks that shattered him far beyond the reach of any arena. His first attempt at stability was with Robin Givens in the late 1980s. Tyson, undefeated in the ring but emotionally unsteady outside it, fell for her gentleness and calm. Their marriage in 1988 felt like a promise of peace, a chance to finally outrun the storms inside him. But fame magnified every flaw. Rumors drowned their attempts at closeness, and 2 young, wounded hearts collapsed under pressures they were never taught to carry. What the world saw as drama was, in truth, 2 people overwhelmed by pain they didn't know how to name. Years later, neither spoke with anger, only sadness. After that chaos, Tyson found steadiness in Monica Turner, a Georgetown pediatric resident whose quiet strength soothed the volatility of his life. She supported him through his prison sentence, waited for him when he walked free in 1995, and married him in 1997. For a brief moment, Tyson tasted the life he had always craved. Mornings with his children, Raina and Amir, and a home that felt safe. But peace is fragile for someone who never learned how to hold it. Old impulses, emotional distance, and the weight of unhealed wounds slowly eroded their marriage. Monica filed for divorce in 2003, and though headlines focused on the settlement, Tyson later said the real loss was the family he believed would save him. But nothing compared to the tragedy that arrived in 2009. Her name was Exodus, a bright, joyful 4-year-old whose presence softened him in ways he never thought possible. Between 2003 and 2009, Tyson and Soul built an imperfect but loving home, tied together by the small wonders of raising children. Then came May 26, 2009, the day that split his life into before and after. Exodus became entangled in an exercise machine at home. Miguel, only 7, witnessed the unimaginable. Soul fought to save her child as paramedics rushed in. Tyson, in Las Vegas, boarded the first plane to Phoenix, moving through the airport like a man already half broken. When he reached the hospital, he learned the truth: no parent survives. His daughter was gone. "There are losses that break a man," he later said, "and there are losses that erase him." He didn't lash out. He didn't blame Soul. He grieved in silence, the pain settling into him deeper than any punch he had ever taken. Their relationship could not endure the sorrow, yet their devotion to Exodus remained sacred. Tyson would later say her memory didn't destroy him. It pushed him toward transformation, toward the man he had always wanted to become. Her short life became the turning point, a rebirth forged not from victory, but from unimaginable loss. There comes a moment in every fallen champion's life when the cheers fade, the lights dim, and the only opponent left is the reflection staring back. For Mike Tyson, that moment arrived after the scandals, the bankruptcy, the spirals of self-destruction, and the unbearable loss of his daughter, Exodus. He no longer saw Iron Mike. He saw a man standing at the edge of a life he had nearly broken, and for the first time, he chose to fight for himself instead of against the world. Tyson often says he rebuilt his life with the very traits that once fueled his chaos: discipline, honesty, fear, humility. At 40, stripped of belts and certainty, he began the slow work of becoming someone capable of peace. That rebirth didn't begin in a ring. It began on a stage. In 2012, he stepped onto Broadway for his one-man show, Undisputed Truth. No gloves, no myth, just truth. He spoke openly of childhood wounds, fame's illusions, the grief of losing his mother, the mistakes he carries forever, and the daughter whose memory reshaped him. The world didn't laugh. It listened. And for the first time, the legend bowed to the man. From there, a new life emerged. Film roles, television appearances, speaking tours, business ventures, and Hot Boxin', the podcast that revealed not the warrior, but the philosopher forged through pain. By the early 2020s, he had rebuilt a net worth of $25 to $30 million, not through extravagance, but through structure and intention. His Las Vegas home reflects that transformation. Sunlit rooms, earth-tone walls, a meditation space glowing softly, a private gym built for longevity instead of combat, laughter from his children drifting across the tennis court where he watches Milan train each morning. It is not a palace. It is a sanctuary, the home he never had as a child, and the one he now protects fiercely. Quietly and steadily, he expanded his real estate investments, choosing stability over spectacle. Even his cars symbolize the man he has become, a curated handful of classics, carefully maintained rather than impulsively collected. But Tyson's greatest evolution lives in his body and how he now honors it. The aches, the sciatica, the the stiffness, all reminders of wars fought long ago. The ulcer scare in 2024 forced him to face the ultimate truth. Time is undefeated. For once, he listened. He shifted from punishing workouts to protective ones. Meditation softened the storms inside him. Restraint replaced violence. And in that shift, he found a strength deeper than any knockout. His family is now the center of everything. Milan rising in tennis. Morocco growing with calm confidence. His older children thriving in film, business, and creative work. When Tyson speaks their names, the fighter disappears and the father remains. "My kids are my redemption," he says, and every word carries the weight of that truth. But the heart of Tyson's legacy lies in what he gives back. The boy, once abandoned, now supports the children who remind him of himself. Youth centers, mental health programs, re-entry services, food outreach, inner-city gyms. These aren't publicity moves. They are gratitude, responsibility, and quiet redemption. In the end, Mike Tyson's legacy isn't just the ferocity of Iron Mike. It is the rebirth of the man who learned, after losing everything, how to finally live with purpose. Now, at 59, Tyson stands not as a myth or monster or fallen icon, but as a man who rose from the ashes of his own making. A man who faced every version of himself: the champion, the child, the rage, the grief, the loss, and still chose to rise again. His story is no longer about knockouts. It is about transformation, reinvention, healing, and the breathtaking truth that even the most broken lives can be rebuilt with courage, humility, and a willingness to change. Mike Tyson's legacy is no longer defined by the violence of his fists, but by the strength of a man who finally learned how to hold his own heart. If Mike Tyson's incredible journey moved you today, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps keep these powerful stories alive. And if you would like to continue exploring the real lives behind the legends, remember to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.